In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Amen. Amen.
Please be seated. I wonder how many of us in this space have ever heard the phrase, how to win friends and influence people. Okay, lots of nods. Well, you know then that it isn't just a phrase, it's the title of a Dale Carnegie course that teaches people in business how to get ahead. Has anyone here ever taken the course? Yeah, I see a few hands going up. I didn't include this, but it's worthy to note in my sharing with you that phrase was used by my father to me a lot as I was growing up. It's how you need to take this course, Beth. You need to take this course. And the more he said it, the more resistant I became. So, but as I was reading this gospel passage, I was thinking about Jesus. Jesus doing things that weren't supposed to be done on the Sabbath. You see, winning friends and influencing people in business is quite simply the most important thing that I'm reading about Dale Carnegie. So I'm going back in my sermon. The most important thing you can do to excel in the workplace, this is what they say on the Carnegie website. Dale Carnegie literally wrote the book. He put the P in the people skills. And if you would like to benefit from his proven practices, then this course is a course you must not miss. How to win friends and influence people. So here we encounter Jesus, who wasn't bound by the law of the Sabbath. And it required, actually, the law of the Sabbath required people to refrain from work, to refrain from cooking, to refrain from plucking grain. And that was unimaginable for Jesus. His disciples were hungry and they needed something to eat. Likewise, healing someone was working for good or was doing something for good. But these actions of Jesus, the Pharisees didn't like them. So we hear at the end of the gospel passage, they were plotting for ways to get him, really, to put him in jail or to, well, we know what happens, right? Yeah. Jesus wasn't bound and determined by that motto, how to win friends and influence people, which makes me even more happy that I didn't listen to my father. Although I have tried to learn how to do that, I have to say. But like I said, Jesus and his disciples were hungry, so they took that head of grain to eat. And then he encounters in the temple someone who'd probably been there for years, somebody who wanted somebody to come and heal him from his withered hand. And Jesus says, is it not okay for me to heal this guy? Or do you have to wait till tomorrow, basically? And they just plotted at him. So Jesus, he wasn't ignoring the Sabbath. He was doing what needed to be done in spite of that rule of the Sabbath. Like I said, everyone needs to eat. And certainly this man, this person needed healing. And Jesus did what was needed. Now, if we look at the word Sabbath, it comes from the Hebrew word Shabbat, which means to stop or to cease. Sabbath, as we know from our Jewish brothers and sisters and from our own tradition, is a time to rest, a time to connect with God and with family and with ourselves. In some conservative religious Jewish families, it isn't acceptable to go shopping, even to use an elevator to cook or clean, which is from sundown on Friday to sundown on Saturday. And some of us in this congregation probably remember those days when stores were closed on Sundays, when there wasn't any activity, there were no soccer games, there were no practices. There were something called blue laws, which were known as Sunday laws that restricted and banned some and all activities on specific days, most often on Sundays, because of the Western world's focus on Sunday being Sabbath. And it was particularly to promote a day of rest. Of course, when we think about it, a lot of people still had to work on Sundays, right? I mean, hospitals didn't close down. No one sent their patients home. People still had to respond to emergencies. There were police officers and EMTs and a whole slew of people that Sabbath rest on a Sunday didn't make any sense or didn't work out for them. Oh, and then there's the church workers, the musicians and the clergy and the Sunday school teachers. But over the past 50 or 60 years, that has all changed significantly. But that doesn't mean that just because it's changed, we shouldn't ignore Sabbath rest. Sabbath is a time to cease, a time to stop, a time to take a break, a time to rest. But our culture often thinks that busyness equals importance. Does that sound familiar? That's what our modern culture feels like today. The more things I have on my calendar, the more effective I am. Who else in here feels a need to list everything that needs to be done and that needs to be worked on in order to feel like you're accomplishing anything? Or are you like me, where you actually do something and you think, oh, that wasn't on my list, so let me put it on my list and let me cross it off. So I can do that. Now the truth comes in. Because then you can look at the list and you can think, wow, I've been really successful today. But what if we schedule time for Sabbath? What if we actually set a block of time, and it doesn't have to be on a Sunday, and for most of us, it's probably not going to be on a Sunday, to say, you know, I'm going to take 2 hours just for me. May not be possible with little children, but you know, it might work. While they're at school, which is going to end soon, I'm sorry for summer schedules that are going to change significantly. Or maybe even if it's not 2 hours, maybe an hour, or maybe 6, I don't know. If you have to decide what's good for your schedule, but I urge us to think about Sabbath as a time to reconnect with ourselves, with our time of prayer, our time of connection with God, whether it's in nature or in a closet where we can finally find time alone. No one knows where we're hiding, but the time to connect with God. Walter Brueggemann, who is an Old Testament scholar and a theologian, notes that finding Sabbath requires intentionality and communal reinforcement. A body of Christ, we need to help each other with the Sabbath idea. It's not enough that we individually seek Sabbath, although that is part of the solution. What is needed is a commitment by the community to find Sabbath. And I will interject that I hope this is a time of Sabbath for you, coming to church, being together in community, finding a place where you feel the Holy Spirit moving and where you can worship God in song and in prayer and in listening to God's word. But it might happen when we are together in community, not in a church, when we say, let's pause for a moment, maybe a week or an hour, and we can think about, or excuse me, an hour a week, you didn't say a week, an hour a week, when we can actually be with one another and not be doing anything, maybe just sitting around a fire or sitting around the table, just checking in. You know, what have been the highs and the lows of your week? What's the best thing that happened to you today or this week? You and I can offer words that counter the not so subtle implication that the more active we are, the more value we hold. And this is his quote I will share. In our contemporary context of the rat race of anxiety, the celebration of the Sabbath is an act of resistance and an alternative. It is resistance because it is a visible insistence that our lives are not defined by production and consumption of commodity goods. Such an act of resistance requires enormous intentionality and communal reinforcement amid the barrage of seductive pressures from the insatiable insistences of the market, with its intrusions into every part of our life, from the family to the national budget. But Sabbath is not only resistance, it is alternative. The alternative to offer is an awareness of and practices of the claim that we are situated on the receiving end of the gifts of God. We are on the receiving end of the gifts of God. And if we slow down, if we look up and around and up at one another and in this amazing world that God has created and placed us in, we get to see and experience Sabbath and the joys of being alive. So I pray that during these summer months, each of us will find time to rest, to fill our souls with peace and grace, joy and love, and to reconnect with yourselves, with those you love, and with the God who loves you unconditionally as a beloved child of God. Amen.
Amen.